Hello. In this video, I will be introducing students to both web forms and Bootstrap, a CSS framework for designing responsive websites. I won't be saying a lot in detail about web forms and HTML form controls here because we're using a book by Robbins that explains each of the HTML form elements very clearly. But I do want to point out that a characteristic of web forms is that they have a lot of very picky, particular tags. And what makes those tags so particular is that they require certain attributes. And so you need to refer to something while you're building your first form, or possibly every form you ever make, because you need to get these attributes correct. And you need to set up the form controls and all the HTML elements and attributes correctly so that the form will work as you want it to. For students in this class, I've made a document that's available to you in Canvas called Forms, ID, Name, and Value, and you should read that and figure out when do you need a name and or a value and or an ID, like which form elements need which attributes. It's quite important or your form won't work properly. I also have this document for you in Canvas that is a summary, a kind of a basic condensed overview of the most common or the most basic form controls. So we use the form element to enclose one entire form. We use inputs, but there's various different kinds. And we use select for a drop-down menu and text area for a longer answer. Now for a form to work, it has to be connected to some kind of script. That script could be written in PHP, it could be written in Python, it could be written in several different languages that you might have never heard of, and it can be written in JavaScript. If it's written in JavaScript, the form may or may not submit to a server. So all these are things that are separate from just building the form with HTML. I've provided a basic all-purpose JavaScript script for you to attach to your form, but you will not be writing any JavaScript this week for your assignment. Now, Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a CSS framework. It can use JavaScript for certain components, but generally you're going to use a CSS file from Bootstrap, and that gives you most of the look and feel that you expect from Bootstrap as a framework. One of the really great things about Bootstrap, and the reason that I introduce it in the same week where you're introduced to web forms, is Bootstrap is great at making a form that looks the same on everybody's computer and also is fully responsive. It's difficult to get that done without using a framework such as Bootstrap. This slide demonstrates why you should be concerned about how your form appears on different computers, different devices, because here we have 6 different looking text area form controls. And one of the key things you want to notice is they're different widths. The text looks different. So you're trying to set up a form to look nice, and how many computers are you going to be able to test it on? How many mobile devices? So by using Bootstrap, you avoid having this possibly bad surprise when you view the form that you built on a computer that you had not previously tested your form on. So here's a simple example of a basic form with Bootstrap styles on it. So if you use the Bootstrap form styles on every form control, on every form element, on every form label, if you use them correctly, carefully, you will see a form that looks pretty much the same on every device, no matter what size, right? Bootstrap is also famous for allowing us to create responsive pages without writing separate media queries And pretty much once you get used to it, it's a no-brainer to make your pages fully responsive, like this phone version of the form that you just saw on the previous slide. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The Bootstrap styles, the Bootstrap classes for form controls, labels, and form groups are a lot. They are picky, they are verbose, and yet, as you saw on the previous two slides, they work really great. So I think the trade-off is worth it, and once you've suffered through your first form with Bootstrap, you will be able to just copy it and edit it in the future when you need to make other forms. Bear in mind that Bootstrap is good at more than just forms. I mentioned it's responsive. It's responsive for everything, not just forms. It gives you a consistent, clean, flat, professional-looking website, and you can kind of whip out a site in no time once you're used to Bootstrap and using the Bootstrap styles. I have to say that some of my students over the years have really loved Bootstrap and used it for everything after they first learn it. And at the same time, I've had students who absolutely hate it. So I'm not concerned which kind you are, right? But you need to use it to find out how you feel about it. So the best place to figure out how to use Bootstrap and how to make it work for you is the Bootstrap site at getbootstrap.com. In the left sidebar, you've got links that lead, sometimes obscurely, to every single thing that you can do with Bootstrap with the basic styles that come with bootstrap.css. So you need to dig around in those and you need to read and scan, but they give you the code, they give you the styles, and it's a really good resource. It will serve you better than random Googling. This is one example of a page that you would find there, the page about Bootstrap colors, which I'll talk about a little more. But Bootstrap comes with a palette and a set of colors, and if you change themes, you can get a different palette, a different set. But this is the default that we're looking at here, and they're explained within that Bootstrap documentation. For students, also on your Canvas site, I have provided a list of links to the pages in that Bootstrap documentation that I use most often. And some of these are a little hard to find, so that's why I gave you a short list of links that lead directly to the things that you most often want to style. So go to these pages and see how Bootstrap recommends you use their classes. I mentioned that you can change the theme. At bootswatch.com, there is a set, a bigger set than what you see here, of free themes that change the font and the color palette for everything. If you download one of these themes, what you've got is a file named bootstrap.css. And what you do is you delete that file that you already had in your CSS folder and you replace it with the new one. Everything else on your pages in your HTML stays exactly the same because in the replacement theme, everything, every class is named the same thing as it is in the default theme. Now, students in my class are about to do an assignment using Forms and Bootstrap. And you need 3 things for this assignment to do well at it and to complete it without being very, very frustrated. So there is a link to a Google Doc called Bootstrap 4 Introduction. There's also a link to a separate Google Doc that has in it 2 playlists for LinkedIn Learning, which used to be called lynda.com. One playlist is only about regular HTML forms, and the other playlist is about the Bootstrap form classes. Only the form classes for Bootstrap. So that playlist doesn't tell you everything about Bootstrap, just the form classes. What you see here are the container elements that you need to use whenever you use Bootstrap. Now, this is when you're making a form or when you're not making a form. You want to have at least one container. You want to have at least one row, and you want to have at least one element that has column styles specified within that element. So here mine are all divs. They wouldn't have to be divs. They could be article or section or any other content grouping element that you know of in HTML, but the order is important. So a column has to be inside a row, and a row has to be inside a container. And usually, as a beginner, you'll only have one container on a page, and usually it'll just contain everything that's inside the body of your document. So if this is not entirely clear to you yet, I want to emphasize it is the classes that come in bootstrap.css that do everything. Usually you're not going to use any JavaScript files with Bootstrap. Bootstrap 4 does not use jQuery for anything at all. It's been thoroughly updated. It's got built-in Flex and Rem and just all the modern HTML5 things that we use every day. I had mentioned the name of the Bootstrap file. It's bootstrap.css, but actually we more often use bootstrap.min.css, and that is because that file is a smaller, slightly smaller file. The reason it's smaller is not because it left anything out. It didn't. It's got everything in it except spaces and hard returns. So by eliminating all the spaces and all the hard returns, it makes a file that humans can't really read, but it is a smaller file, so it's a smaller download for your website's users. If you use any Bootstrap custom components, such as Bootstrap's famous navbar or Bootstrap's really, really common carousel for sort of sliding back and forth among images and so forth, you will probably need an additional CSS file that you will find on the example page for that custom component. Now, I mentioned the container, the row, and the column before. Of course, you can have more than one column inside a row. You can have more than one row. But this construction, this way that the elements work together, is something that students often, get wrong, mess up a little bit. So you want to make sure that when you're using a column, its element, whether it's a div, an article, a section, whatever, its element is inside an element with the class of row. And when you use a row, an element with the class of row, you want to make sure that that element is inside a div, an article, a section, with the class container. Now, there's a second kind of container class called container fluid, but I would say as a beginner, just forget you ever heard that. Just use class equals container on your outermost div, and then inside that put a row, and inside that put at least one column. Now, you might be wondering about those weird column styles that we saw on a previous page, right? When you're setting up the column classes, you want to designate whether you're talking about a medium breakpoint, that is a medium-sized screen. So looking at the numbers here in pixels, a medium-sized screen in the mind of Bootstrap is a screen that is between 768 pixels wide and 992 pixels wide. You don't really need to know exactly what that looks like. You can adjust it as you've learned already by having your Chrome developer tools open and sliding the width of your browser in and out, or testing certain devices such as iPhones and iPads using the developer tools. Not only Chrome has them, but Firefox, etc. So Bootstrap has 5 breakpoints built in, and they are designated by what you see in the pink or red row that is labeled class prefix. So you're going to have .col hyphen, and then whatever follows that determines which breakpoint are you using. So sometimes if your page is really just one column wide all the way, you might want to only set a breakpoint for the MD or medium column, or possibly the large LG column. And you can fool around with this a little bit and you can see what works for you and what works for your page layout. One thing I would caution you with a form in particular, you do not want a form to go all the way across the whole width of an extra large monitor. Picture a giant iMac screen on somebody's desk, right? It's like as wide as your arm is long. And do you want a form box that somebody's just going to type like 5 little letters into? Do you want that form box to go the whole way from the left to the right of that giant screen? No, right? So what I would put on a form would probably be COL-MD maybe 10, right? Or maybe I'd do COL-LG for large -10. But I would limit it, I would not let it go across all 12 columns. I would limit the width of my form to something smaller than 12 at one of the middle breakpoints, either medium or large. It'll help if you keep in mind that the Bootstrap grid, it's an underlying invisible grid, and it's always got 12 columns. When you put that number in your column class, you tell that div or whatever the class is inside, you tell it how many columns do I want you to span at this breakpoint width. Putting more than one class on a single HTML element is very, very common when we're using Bootstrap. So in this example, you've got an H1, which is a headline, and we've actually got 3 different classes inside that H1 heading. So note that the word class and the equal sign appears only once. All the classes you want to put on, even if you're putting on like 10 or 20 or whatever you would need, they are all inside one single pair of quotation marks. They are separated by spaces. If you don't style your classes the right way, if you don't type them right, they won't work. You won't see the classes applied to your element. And what we've got here, these are all custom Bootstrap classes that come with the basic bootstrap.css. Text info is something that changes the color of the text. So you look up colors in Bootstrap and you find out how to change colors of backgrounds and text elements and all kinds of things. PT stands for padding top, and -5 is a measurement. So we're actually adding padding to the top of this H1. PB means padding bottom, and we're adding a different amount of padding to the bottom of this H1. Now, people who are just starting to use Bootstrap often want to add in a bunch of their own styles, and they'll attach a separate style sheet and write all this extra CSS. That is not needed, not necessary. Bootstrap actually contains pretty much everything in that bootstrap.css file. It's all already in there, but you have to look up what is the Bootstrap class named so that you can apply it. So this is just a small sample. Bootstrap can let you center an image, make an image responsive, make text larger or smaller. It can change text and background colors. It can make beautiful little call-out boxes for like a tip or a little sidebar, something like that. So if you take the time to explore the Bootstrap docs, you will find that everything is already handled for you, and 99% of the time, you do not need to attach your own style sheet, and you should not. Now, if for some reason you absolutely have to use an additional style sheet, do not ever edit bootstrap.css. Don't open it, don't change anything inside there. The reason is that if you ever want to update that site by using a new version of regular Bootstrap, or you want to change your theme, or you want to convert your site to some beautiful commercial theme that you've found, if you've changed anything inside bootstrap.css, then it won't work when you swap out the original default bootstrap.css for the new one that comes with your new theme. So if you want to add styles in your own special CSS style sheet, you can do that, but make sure that in your head you link that style sheet beneath the bootstrap.css link, because you want those styles that you wrote to override the Bootstrap styles, and that means they have to be loaded after. So learning Bootstrap is, of course, there are tutorials and videos and so forth, but I recommend just going straight into the docs because they've written code for you. They show you examples. The docs are very clear and easy to use once you find the right doc. Now, finding the right one for what you want, like color or spacing, sometimes that can be a little bit of a treasure hunt. But the docs are really good once you found the right one. Also, I have a link here to some examples that I made for beginners. They're very simplistic, but mainly what they show you is if you change the width of the browser window while you're looking at my examples, you'll see how Bootstrap adapts so beautifully to be responsive. Finally, the last thing is you can also buy commercial Bootstrap themes. They are pretty much a one-time fee. They range anywhere from $12 to more than $100, and they come with their own bootstrap.css file, and often some other Bootstrap files and possibly JavaScript and so forth. You can just browse these at getbootstrap.com, where they're under the heading themes. So this is the end of this introduction, and I hope it was helpful for you. There are links in the YouTube area below the video screen so that you can just click them rather than trying to copy them off of the video.